Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I'm your host, Lucas McCann. With us today, Rhea Steele, Chief of Staff and VP of Strategy and Governance at School Nutrition Association. Did I get it right?
You certainly did.
It's a long title. We'll get to that in a minute. But welcome, Rhea, to the show. I will turn the microphone over to you to start, as I typically do. Tell us a little bit about how you found associations, where you are today, and how you found this crazy world.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a fascinating journey for me. I actually went to school for museums and field studies for my graduate degree. So I have undergraduate degrees in anthropology and fine arts. And at that, decided I wanted to be a museum. So, started out in museums and then, happened to have a couple internships that brought me out to the East Coast. I was living out in Colorado prior to that. And
the museums just sort of drew you to DC naturally.
Right. After saying I'm never going to live in DC, suddenly I found myself in Annapolis, which is absolutely fascinating. And, as one of the internships was winding up, interestingly enough, the husband of my sponsor for one of the internships actually worked at an association and brought me in for this one weekend to help out with this thing that I completely didn't understand, that I deeply understand now was a session selection meeting for their annual conference. But I was just brought in to help with the technology, and had this amusing moment for me at the time where they had their file server. And so I had a spreadsheet up in front of them where I was running it. And then I had a laptop in my lap and was making changes and everything was happening live. And I think that they had never experienced something like that in their lives. And I found myself with a job offer to an association, within a matter of weeks. And, I have to be honest, it came in at the same time as a job offer to a museum research firm. And there was a pretty significant difference in pay for the two. And I was like, hey, I'm going to take the higher pay, which, is kind of an interesting entryway to the association space.
Higher pay to the association space, not a typical route, but.
Right? Most of us don't think that.
No, I've seen a lot of the corporate jump over. That would be also atypical, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I also do think coming from the museum environments, their budgets are tight, and museum researchers especially there's not very many, in that crowd. So it was a really interesting jump over to be making, because I had never experienced associations, no idea what this thing was that I had just stepped myself into. And it was an education policy organization. I'd never had education policy background, experience at all, ever. I did have the research background, and came in on the programmatic side of things. And then shortly, I would say within about a year or so, through an interesting series of events, wound up working part-time in the programmatic side and part-time in the IT side, which is actually where kind of my interest in systems change and process improvement really, started flourishing. So
I knew there was some tech background there somewhere. Yeah. Now we've just found the root origin.
Right, exactly. It's all informal though, right?
Right.
I throughout my career, I've actually kept finding myself in jobs where there's a component of technology. Even when I was a graduate assistant, I was really good friends with the webmaster for the museum, and she went out on maternity leave and was like, "You can do this, right?" And I was like, "Sure." Right. So I wound up, managing their website for a couple months while she was out. And so it's been kind of interesting that the tech has had, flowed through my career in that way. And then through kind of a series of additional events, the IT director at the time wanted to shift over onto the programmatic side of the organization. And so his position came open. Mm-hmm. And so I negotiated myself into an IT manager role in the organization, which was, really interesting, because I think for me, it was less about the technology and more about the systems change and my ability to affect process change in the organization, and being able to see how we could connect some of the dots across the organization by leveraging technology, and leveraging kind of the relationships that the technology team can build. And I think that's been a thread throughout my career too. And I even do it in HR and in the other buckets that I oversee now, where I'm looking at my team and myself as integrators across the organization, right? Like anytime we're having staff conversations, we're making connections, right? We're receiving information. And a lot of times, because my teams are working across the organization, we have those opportunities to connect dots that may not be connected otherwise. So we can really affect organizational change and really help the organization grow and strengthen because we're helping to connect dots that may not be connecting already.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like a far jump to go from, research to technology, but it's really not. I mean, the more you talk about it, I saw the bridge that seemed natural in your course, and really a lot of technology. In fact, Artesia Moore, I don't know if you saw on LinkedIn, she's wearing a t-shirt that says something along the lines, AI is nothing more than math, or is just math, or something like that. I was like, first of all, that's brilliant and hilarious at the same time, but a lot of it is, right? I mean, the technology is just, as you said, the systems, it's math. It's connecting dots, making things efficient, work more integrated together.
Yeah. And it's definitely, for me, one of the things I say a lot, right, is that all of us, wherever you're at in an association, if you are in a leadership position or even growing into a leadership position, you have to understand the technology around you, right? We're not living in an era anymore where we can say, yeah, I don't do that, right? I don't use Teams. I don't use Gmail, right? Like we're in a space where in order to really make strategic decisions where we're moving ourselves forward against our mission and our vision, we have to understand the technologies in our environment, and we have to, we don't have to be able to code things, right? We don't have to be able to like stand up a server or, build an app, but we do need to understand how the technologies can be used, how they're shifting the world around us, how they're shifting our members' needs, and how they might be leveraged in an organization, right? We'll always have tech experts that can actually like implement for us, right? But as leaders, it's so critically important for us to just be aware so that we can connect those strategic dots.
Yeah, I think there's a rising expectation of the quality and the quantity of output of any one role. And so if you can't utilize these tools, if you roll the clock back 10 years ago, the output of a marketing professional, for example, might be a few graphic designs every couple of days. And now it should be minutes, right? To, an hours at the most, that you can use these tools that can create a lot of it for you. And you say, oh, we don't need to code. And I think it will get to a point where nobody needs to code. As long as you can communicate what you're ultimately trying to create, there will be technology, AI, bots, whatever you want to call it, that will do all that heavy lifting for you, or not even heavy lifting, just sort of the grunt blocking and tackling to it.
Yeah. Yep. And I also think with that, for us as strategic leaders, right, we have to really be thinking about where we're spending our time and energy, right? I think for me, one of those things I love that makes others crazy is I love systems change, right? I love these kind of like really big problems that our organizations are facing, and thinking about where all the little levers are, right? That we need to be, pulling, and where we need to be tweaking policy or approach or things like that to actually get us to that really big change. And I feel like, AI and, some of the other tools we have at hand to make our jobs easier, I create new sets of issues, but also if we're leveraging them properly, they can help us find that space to be in that higher strategic plane as leaders, right? Yep. So you're really thinking bigger picture, and you're looking for more opportunities across your environment.
Yeah, it made me think of, and I mentioned that I would mention this when we were talking pre-show, was you have a quote on your LinkedIn that says, transparency is the window into the soul of our strategy, and that sharing the how and the why ultimately builds the trust, essentially, to be able to accomplish these things. That's deep and it's big. And I'm 100% believer on the root of that being trust. But talk to us a little bit more about that specific idea, how you implement that, what it looks like in practice.
Yeah. It's a lot of talking.
Yeah.
In reality, I'm right. Exactly. I'm actually a really firm believer in transparency, in sharing as much as we can. I also acknowledge I'm in HR, right? Like one of the buckets I oversee. So I deeply recognize that there are things that you can't share, right? That they're, personnel issues, things like that. But when we're talking organization strategy writ large, or we're talking about organizational change management, process change, right? Whether you're looking at governance or virtual remote, right? Like anytime our organizations are grappling with how we're going to do anything, the more we can be communicating and the more transparent we can be with our rationale and our thinking, the more buy-in we're going to get and the better decisions we're going to make, right? So I always think about it through a couple of different lenses. One is, where are we trying to go strategically, right? What are we looking to do as an organization? And, what is it that people need to know about that in order to be effective either in their jobs or effective participants in it, or, receive the benefits from it. The other thing I'm always thinking about is, what are the impacts and consequences of what we're trying to do, and how do we leverage transparency? How do we leverage communication early enough in our change processes that we can actually change, right? So we can actually make adjustments to where we think we're headed based on the reality on the ground, as opposed to deciding we're going down a certain path and getting so far down that we're not actually able to make adjustments anymore.
Yeah. And,
I use piloting as language because I think a lot of people are familiar with pilots.
Tell me more.
And so part of what I am always thinking about with anything we're thinking about doing is really, we start talking around the edges, we start formulating, and then I'm throw it out there to the masses. I don't care if nobody's ready for it, right? I don't, just get it out there. And it doesn't have to be ready, and it shouldn't be ready. And we should be telling people it's not ready, because what we need to do is we need to your earlier point, we're building trust by saying we're working on this. We know we don't have all the answers. We want you to help us really refine it. And we're definitely putting out here before, this is not a clean product, right? This is not the final thing. And what I have found is, in doing that, we're bringing people into the process in a very different way, and we're valuing their perspectives. We're valuing their opinions. And 98% of the time, we're coming up with a product where at least it has a couple components that we never would have thought of if we hadn't thrown it out there. And I will say this, this applies to processes from we redid we blew up one of our conferences and completely restructured it. And we were going down one path, and we were time out. We need to check with the attendees of the conference. And we got some feedback. We were and we had to back up and pivot, switch some things, right? And I've done it with organizational redesign too, where, we use different layers of the staff to really dig into the, you got to start at one layer where you're kind of at least putting something, right? Or setting something up. And then you can involve other people in the redesign so that they have a greater stake in the whole organization, and they can articulate things that, top level management in an organization may never see and may not recognize when they're doing a redesign.
Something I've stood on in our organizations is always having as many, if not all, staff in the strategic planning portions of our annual meetings. We do a biannual meeting just to kind of check in, and then we do quarterlies and monthlies and the whole deal. And originally it was, hey, let's get everybody's ideas on the table. And I really want to go around and have everybody participate in some form or fashion, because sometimes it is something that goes unspoken. You want all the feedback, positive or negative, so that you can make the best decisions. And let's hash this out together. But I want everybody to see that process, because I think there's a lot of value in just opening up about the thinkings and the hows and the whys, as you mentioned. What's interesting is what ultimately came out of that, if I look back in my career, was it was more of a deposit or investment in the culture than it was the strategy. Talk to us a little bit about how you marry those things, maybe in your current role, and the importance of strategy and culture together, because those are two very large components of your current role.
They are. And I think for me, it's really difficult to separate the two. I am a firm believer in generating really high levels of engagement with our staff. And a lot of that, is about really identifying, where staff can best support the strategic plan, and helping them understand those places. And in parallel with that, right, as you're connecting staff to the strategic plan, you're also building this culture of engagement, right? The culture of excitement. And you're really helping them see value in the work that they're bringing to the organization. I think with me, so much of what I do is I look at like interpersonal interaction. So like this intersection between systems and people. And I'm really looking at how are we operating as a leadership team? And then how does that impact the staff that are directly reporting to us? And then how are the staff in the various departments of our organization interacting with each other? And how are we supporting their ability to work directly with each other, right? So you're not going up the hierarchy back down, but engaging them at a level that they feel sufficiently empowered to work directly with each other, but also run things up if they need to run them up. And while we're doing those things, having these constant conversations about, the strategic plan and the strategic alignment. And what's interesting is that I don't think I ever use, like if I'm thinking about like a week of conversations with staff, I don't think I ever use the word strategic plan unless I'm in a governance conversation and we're potentially planning for the board, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's because we're embedding it in a different way. So I'm not having to point to, this is area of focus, thriving organization. And what we're talking about right now is, our digital first strategy under thriving organization, right? Like that's not how I'm talking on a daily basis, right? But what I am talking about all the time is why are we doing what we're doing, right? What is the end goal of the conversation we're having today about implementing a new registration system, right? And I think that goes to that why piece, right? The more as leaders we're talking about the why and even if we're not saying strategic planning, like the connection to like doing these three things is going to help us better serve our members and is going to help make your job more straightforward with less steps so that you can do higher value work for the organization. Pulling all of those pieces together, I mean, from a cultural standpoint, I have found it results in a really high performing organization, right? Because the staff feel heard. They know where their work connects. And they also start seeing connections between their work and the work of others.
Yeah. Being siloed and kind of just going through and hitting the hammer, stamping one license plate, whatever it is, it's hard to understand unless you see the whole picture, the value of what it is that you're doing and how it sort of fits into the role. And I did not tee you up before the show for this, so I'm putting you on the spot now, if I could. Do you have moments looking back in your career, recent past, where you recognize one of these things? What did that look like? And sanitize it as you need to for, organization and names. But is there a moment where you thought or did something that you said, that was exactly what I'm talking about? That was the intersection. And the only way I found it was because I asked a specific question or we had to do something different. If I put you in the seat, could.
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually think it's an interesting question because I mean, I can point to a couple of different moments in my career. I sort of this large systems integration work that I started doing actually started with the technical systems integration, right?
Makes sense.
And at one of my early organizations, we went from not having any database at all, and somehow functioning as an organization as one does, to actually, I had to make the case that we needed a database. And to your point about like connecting the dots, I remember distinctly I had conversations with multiple teams across the organization. And I remember staff at various points saying, oh my God, it took me forever to look that up. Or, I just wish I had one place I could go to for it. And I had all of these different conversations about like, how long did it actually take you to find this one piece of information? And I asked every team the same question. And I remember being in front of our all staff meeting, kind of pitching this. And I was like, and after talking with all of you, it took this team this many hours and this team this many hours. And I was able to actually, like with data, lay out.
Pull the calculator up.
Right. Exactly.
Here's how much time was wasted, you all. So actually, we're going to save money by implementing $50,000 or $100,000 solution, right?
Exactly. And for me, that was one of those points where I'm like, it's interesting you asked that question because I never thought about the fact that I can actually point my fascination and excitement about organizational change back to a moment like that, where I can see that all of these people are working around the same issue. None of them know that the others are working around the same issue, and I can see the issue and I can help them move through this and create a different environment for them to be working in. Which is a really powerful, powerful moment. Thank you for bringing that to me.
Well, you and I share that. I also like big, complex, the more complex, the better. I get jazzed up about that. I like the systems aspect, matching with the culture piece as well. And I had a moment early in my career where I was working in sales, and we had a marketing team that seemed like it was on the other side of the county at the time, even though they were just on the other side of one wall. And neither of us knew what the other was doing. All of a sudden, we'd get an influx of inbound calls. Why is this happening? Why are we doing all this? And there was just never a communication connection, a bridge that was ever made to say, hey, here's the feedback back and forth. And, oh, what are you all doing? And how does that impact over here? And I really enjoyed that. For me, if I asked myself the question, which I guess I just did internally, and now I'm sharing the answer, that's what started it for me. Was I found a bridge, I solved a problem, and I thought, that was fun.
Yeah. And that's what I will say, that I'm in the middle, we're in the middle of some really complex governance change, right now. And I'm finding myself kind of going back to the data we've collected over the tiny, tiny changes that we've made over the last 3 years, which are actually adding up to huge, huge returns, in the governance work. And sort of now at this sort of stage in my career, actually being able to see that, whereas I think that in earlier stages of my career, I wasn't actually able to always see the impacts of the work that I was doing until I had stepped out of the organization, stepped away and looked back and been like, oh, wow. And I think that I'm much more intentional now, especially, this ties into the culture question you asked. I'm much more intentional now in looking for the positive impacts of the changes that we're making and drawing attention to them and showing people with data, especially, and making sure we're creating the data sets if we can.
Right.
But showing people with data that we are changing, right? And so there's this constant cheerleader space that I'm in right now, making sure that everybody is also seeing the change we're making as we're going through it. So nobody is feeling too much like we're not moving anything forward, right? You'll always, I think, in any organizational change, you'll always have folks feeling like too much is moving forward, not enough is moving forward, right? But striking that middle ground and helping everybody see what we're doing is really important.
A lot of folks that I talk to that come from the corporate world and sort of take the pay cut, unlike museums, I understand now, but that take the pay cut to come into nonprofits are doing so because they have a heart for mission-driven work. And if you don't see the impact, I could also echo that. In the earlier parts of my career, I underemphasized or underestimated the impact of those motivational factors of, hey, are we really moving the ball? And again, I'm just kind of in my lane doing my thing. And even if I did understand, okay, here I am, the cog in the wheel, but where's the wheel going and what is the wheel doing and everything else? I now, later in my career, or whatever, understand how motivating and how just valuable and impactful that could be to show everybody inside and outside the organization the impact you're having.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, jumping off of that, I think one of the other things that somebody was asking me recently, one of my friends has a tendency to text me these really deep questions first thing in the morning. And I think she had messaged me something about what one thing do you feel like has been most informative to you in your career in working with other staff?
That's a wake-up question? Wow.
Yes. This is where I get to start my morning, right? Okay. I'm like, all right, I'm ready for this. No coffee.
Turn the brain on.
Yeah. Right. But it was really interesting because in parallel to celebrating change, right, attention to the progress we're making, it made me think about how important it has been for me to learn to appreciate and deeply value history with that. Right. So I've had some very hard learning lessons in my career related to history, from the perspective of properly valuing the experience people have had in the organization and what they bring from years and years of working in an organization. And, what I have learned from that is that unless we look at the history, we comprehend why decisions were made, what the cultural space was that, organizations or staff or members were functioning in before we initiate the change effort, and continue to respect that history as we're going through the change effort has a lot more tension in it.
Sure.
If we're not constantly thinking about that, right? And so it's kind of an interesting thing that made me think of when I was thinking about like the forward part of change.
There's tension in change. I think that's the part that most people back away from, and I've learned to just kind of embrace. In fact, sometimes the more tension, the more reason you should have that conversation, the more reason to lean in. And there's so much more trust and relationship on the other side of that if you do that than if you do the opposite and run away or shy away or what have you. But so you got culture, you have strategy. You all are hiring into this culture and strategy environment, which is great. It's not easy to hire into association staff these days to begin with. What are things that you're doing? What's your strategy, if you will, on the hiring, and what's some advice that you could share just from your career that's worked well in this position of hiring tell us the role too.
Yeah. So we've actually,
context.
Right. We've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
We actually have, I think, 4, maybe 5 today roles out there right now. Okay. We've got an accounting manager role. We've got, a marketing manager role. We've got an editorial content manager role. We've got our foundation coordinator role. And today, I think we just posted our state policy analyst role, which is like a government relations position. So we've got a lot out there right now. Sorry, I had to think through the list. So what I think is really interesting about our approach right now is that I'm a firm believer that you don't ever rehire into an existing position unless you are 100% positive that position still needs to be in the organization. So anytime we have a vacancy at the organization, I'm working with the vice president and or the hiring manager, depending on where it is in the organization, to actually take a step back and look at the department structure, look at the future needs, and really assess what we need for one of our teams. And so what's fascinating about what that has resulted in is that a number of brand new positions keep getting created in our organization because we're identifying that like what we needed previously actually isn't what we need now, right? So for all of the positions that I've just listed off, we've had the accounting manager before. Yeah. But the others are brand new positions to the organization, which I think is really cool because that means people get to make it what they want. That's cool. But it's also really helping us as an organization stay focused on the future, right? And be looking for the relevant, up-to-date skill sets and kind of making sure that we're constantly thinking about what do we need to do as an organization and where do we need to be next.
Yeah, I keep hearing that, new roles pop up. I heard new in the association world, the chief experience officer, these type of things, like these weren't around. And some of these roles weren't even around for your particular association. So I love that idea of just taking the time to pause. I do the same thing after mistakes, which we all make. Maybe I make them more often than others. But to learn from that, I'm like teaching my son the same thing. Like, it's okay to have a bad game or bad practice or whatever it is, but stop and figure out what happened. And then is that something you need to carry forward? I love the idea of, in the same right, is this a position? We've always had it, is the response. Well, okay, yes, but do we need to have it moving forward? That's the past. So I don't hear that very often. If anybody's listening, I would highly encourage that. And that could be a 1 hour conversation. That could be a 1 week conversation, however long it takes you to sort of untangle and debrief on the role, its importance, the skill set. Is that really what we need for the next 5 years? I just can't think enough about that. So I want to take now a full circle. And by that, I mean, I've now heard the story. You came in essentially through a volunteering, right? You came in through a volunteer position that was part of an association, which is, I'd say, one route. Some people are born into it. Some people run away from corporate. Like, I love that you came in through the volunteer route, but you've really come full circle in the sense that you do a lot of volunteering on boards and committees and certifications, but specifically you've done a lot with ASAE. Like, tell us a little bit more about your history with ASAE and your sort of your current roles and responsibilities there.
Yeah, so I actually came into ASAE on the recommendation of a former supervisor who, interestingly enough, I don't think was very active in ASAE, but encouraged me to join. And was lucky enough actually to land in one of the ASAEs very early. It was pre-Next Gen, so it was called the Leadership Academy. So I think our group was the last class of 2012. And, I had this opportunity to be with, a number of association professionals newer in our careers, and kind of build this like cohort, and also find myself in this place where, ASAE can be kind of overwhelming if you're just trying to walk in by yourself, right? And so I had this group of people that all of a sudden I know, and we're learning about leadership together, and we're understanding ourselves as leaders, and we're going to all of these conferences. And I was lucky enough at one of the conferences to meet some of the like volunteer managers or ASAE staff who were responsible for some of the volunteer groups, and then found myself in the I didn't find myself. Let me reframe. I asked about one of the committees to see how to get on it. Right? I don't want to pretend this was not intentional. It was very intentional.
You didn't walk into a room not knowing what it was.
Right. I was like, what? And so I actually did manage my own pathway, and kind of was asking questions about how to get on committees. And then I wound up on a committee, and I feel like that's the beginning of my ASAE journey. And everything in terms of what I have learned through participating in ASAE, through courses, through the networks, through studying for the CAE exam. I have grown so much in my career just by having the opportunities. And I've reached a point in my career where I want to give back to others, right? I want to take the opportunity to make sure they have the same learning opportunities I did, make sure that, if I'm able to get onto a panel, making sure I'm bringing others who've never been on a panel with me. And I think all of us have the responsibility to try to help others learn and grow in whatever way, is important to them, right? Which also kind of feeds into why associations are important to me, right? There's an association for everything, right? As we all know. And those are the places, right? I had to throw that in there. But those are the places.
Odd birds out there. I won't name them, but
there are. And those are those places where those individuals with that same, care about whatever the industry is, are going to get their network, to network, to get their learning, to get education. And I feel like it's so important that we are an industry that can provide that within individual industries to people, which is, it's just fascinating to be able to be part of that.
Yeah. And so currently you're on the Executive Management Advisory Council. Is that right?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about that. What is that council about, and what drew you to that specifically?
Yeah. That council is really focused in on all elements of leadership in the association level. So the council is made up of a variety of individuals that are all somewhere in the high level C-suite of their association. And the council is really focused on providing educational opportunities and learning opportunities for ASAE. So the council works pretty closely with the volunteer leadership of ASAE. And we're generally looking at topics that we feel like they're not bleeding edge, right? But there may be topics that we could be paying more attention to in the association space. I know that they're working on a webinar series right now. I don't know if I should say what the topic is, so I won't. Okay. But they're looking at, I don't know how far out it's gone yet, but they're working on a webinar series right now around some new topics. I know last year they did a webinar series related to like what the role of the chief operating officer is in an association and how you have that synergy with the CEO. And so it's really about helping us to kind of think differently and help seed new knowledge, I think, with the association executives, like at the higher levels of the organization.
That's really interesting. It is a little overwhelming stepping into ASE. I remember years ago just sort of going to an annual meeting and trying to figure out, where do I go? What do I do? And you've kind of popped around to a couple of different areas, so I can appreciate that. And again, I wanted to point out that you came in through volunteer, and that the idea that you're giving back is just such an inspiration and aspiration for some of the younger folks that are in the industry, but also just highly recommend, when you feel you've gotten to that point, it is just invaluable to do that, and sort of next gen, bringing those young leaders up in the association industry. It not only is self-fulfilling, but it's a really kind of a deposit and investment in the industry. And so we thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And one thing caveat I would put on what you said is that I would encourage everyone to start giving back before they feel like they're ready. I think that a lot of us in the industry we start out in the space of, oh, I'm not an expert. Oh, people don't need to hear what I'm saying. And so many association professionals just are so brilliant, and side conversations that you're just like, wait, what did you just say? And so I think a lot of people don't perceive themselves as expert when actually they really are. And so I would encourage anybody who's listening to this to really think about what you're passionate about and start sharing that with others.
Yeah, well said, and good catch. Wait, please correct me. That was, you said that much better than I did. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the show. As I wrap us up, as we do, I often ask folks, is there somebody else that you would recommend that could come on our show that you think our audience would find value in hearing from?
Oh my gosh. Yes, there was someone I was just thinking of that I don't think you've had yet. Have you talked to Rodnika Scott yet?
Sounds great.
She's amazing. I heard you talk to Sharon Newport, because I saw it on your list.
Yes.
And there's definitely, I'm sure if I sat down, I could give you a list of 15 people.
I'm sure you could. We'll put Casey back in touch with you. We'll get it locked down. But Rhea, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your history, your story. And I think there's some gold in there that I hope our listeners will take away and implement in their own association. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.